It looks like you're scoring points by taking care of Mom. But don't forget, this house isn't going to you or my brother. I'm the eldest, so remember that.
Emily, my sister-in-law, declared as she crossed her arms and glared at me while I was washing dishes in the kitchen. Today, the whole family gathered at our home to celebrate my father-in-law's retirement. I simply complimented the gift Emily gave to my father-in-law, saying, "It's really lovely," while we were cleaning up afterward. How did a conversation about a gift turn into one about inheritance? An eldest. While it technically means the firstborn, it's not a term I'm used to hearing, so I chuckled awkwardly. Scoring points. That's not what I... Before I could finish, Emily snorted and left the room. I was left alone, watching her walk away. My name is Monica. I'm 32 years old and a stay-at-home wife. I live with my in-laws, managing all the household chores and taking care of my mother-in-law, whose legs aren't as strong as they used to be.
I'm so sorry, Monica. I feel awful making you take care of me when you're still newlyweds.
She needed help right after I married my husband, Keith, and she's always been very considerate of me. My in-laws are such kind people, always mindful of my needs as their daughter-in-law. That's why I've never found living with them to be burdensome. And besides, taking care of my mother-in-law isn't that demanding. She's not bedridden, just a little unsteady on her feet. She's always eager to help with chores she can manage while sitting, like folding laundry, which makes me feel a bit guilty. It's been nearly 2 years since we started living together, and I've had a good relationship with Keith and my in-laws. But the peaceful days began to grow tense after Emily, my sister-in-law, got involved. Emily is already married, and she and her husband have a daughter in middle school. They live in the next town over, so we didn't see them all that often. But now things are different. Everything seemed to change last month when my father-in-law retired, and we celebrated his retirement at our house. On the day of the retirement party, we decided to surprise my father-in-law by preparing gifts, and my mother-in-law and I made all his favorite dishes.
I never expected such a surprise.
My father-in-law said, a bit embarrassed but clearly happy. We all thanked him for his hard work and handed over our gifts.
Here's mine.
When my father-in-law unwrapped a gift from Emily, an antique-style clock with a calm, elegant design appeared.
The intricate carvings are impressive.
It's a custom-made, one-of-a-kind piece. It cost $1,000.
Emily announced, causing everyone in the room to exchange surprised glances.
When you think about how grateful we are to Dad, that's a small price to pay.
Emily's words brought tears to my father-in-law's eyes.
I see. Emily, your thoughtfulness makes me really happy. I'll treasure it.
My mother-in-law was also wiping her eyes. What a nice family, I thought with a smile. The peaceful and joyful moment passed by. But that's where the good part ended. It's been about a month since my father-in-law's retirement celebration. For some reason, Emily has been visiting my in-laws frequently.
I've come by again. Get me some tea, will you?
Here we go again, I thought with a sigh, but I had no choice but to make the tea. I told myself it was just another task while serving my in-laws, and that made it easier to bear. But Emily's frequent visits were starting to bother me. First, she always came alone. It was the same on the day of my father-in-law's retirement party. She has a husband and a daughter, but they never seem to come with her. Are her husband and daughter okay with this? Second, she always brings homemade food as a gift for my in-laws. She says, "I made too much." But the food Emily brings is so delicious that I find it hard to believe she made it herself. If I remember correctly, Emily used to be terrible at cooking. And third, her harassment toward me. I've always thought she had a somewhat harsh personality, but since my father-in-law's retirement celebration, her words and behavior have become particularly cruel.
Isn't the seasoning in your cooking too strong? Are you trying to shorten our parents' lives? And just because mom is kind to you, don't think you can get away with bullying her behind our backs.
Emily would throw these snide comments at me when my in-laws weren't looking. Not wanting to let her have the last word, I fired back. Bullying? You mean like what you're doing to me? Don't worry, Mom and I get along just fine. And by the way, your seasoning is much stronger. You pour sauces and mayonnaise all over your salads and side dishes. But the seasoning in the dishes you bring as gifts is just right. Seeing Emily's face turn red at my retort gave me a small sense of satisfaction. The snide remarks don't bother me much, but what I really can't stand is Emily's habit of asking for my things.
Oh, these earrings are cute. Let me borrow them for a bit. Oh, this charm on your bag is lovely. Let me borrow this too.
She would spot my belongings, make a fuss, and insist on borrowing them. Even when I firmly refused or asked Keith to step in, it didn't help. In the end, she would take them, and many things haven't been returned to this day.
Emily, are you not getting along with your husband? You haven't brought your daughter around lately.
Emily used to be terrible at cooking, so when did she get so good at it?
My in-laws, even if they didn't notice Emily's harassment toward me, seemed to sense something was off with her and asked her about it.
Oh, come on. That's not true at all. My husband just tells me to relax at my parents' house once in a while. And my daughter's grown out of the age where she follows me around everywhere. Besides, I've been married for over 10 years. It's only natural that I've improved at cooking.
Emily made these excuses, and my in-laws seemed satisfied with her explanation. But the unease in my chest only grew larger. Well, I'm so exhausted today. After confirming that Emily had left, I sank into the empty living room. Every day, Emily would throw snide remarks at me, telling me to do this or that, and I was completely worn out. Keith understood how much I was struggling and suggested that we talk to my in-laws about it. But I didn't want to worry them too much. Besides, I didn't want to dampen their spirits, especially when they seemed so happy that Emily was visiting. Still, isn't she coming over a bit too often? Could it be that Emily wants to move in with my in-laws? If that's the case, why doesn't she just discuss it with them? This is really exhausting. Once I sat down, I couldn't muster the energy to get back up. But there were still chores to do. I tried to stand up, using a low shelf nearby for support. In the process, my elbow accidentally hit the clock. It was the clock that Emily had given to my father-in-law. A loud thud echoed, and a few seconds later, I turned pale. The next evening, while I was folding laundry in my room, Keith sat down in front of me with a serious expression. "What's wrong?" I asked, and Keith rummaged through the closet, pulling out something to show me. It was the garbage bag I had placed in the trash bin. Inside was the clock Emily had given to her father. Now, when I say trash bin, I mean the temporary storage bin in the garden where we kept sorted trash until collection day. I had hidden the clock there to confront Emily about something. Of course, I never intended to actually throw it away, but now that Keith had found it, he probably thought I was planning to discard it. But I couldn't just leave the clock on display. I couldn't let anyone else in the family, especially my father-in-law, discover the truth about the clock. When I didn't say anything, Keith, growing impatient, started to accuse me.
Dad's been looking everywhere for that clock. What's wrong with you? Are you out of your mind? Emily went to all that trouble.
I cut him off. Then why don't you try pressing this button? At my words, Keith hesitated, but then did as I instructed and pressed the button. I had accidentally discovered this small button when I bumped the clock with my elbow. At first glance, it wasn't clear what the button was for.
What the?
Keith was baffled. And no wonder. As soon as he pressed the button, a male voice started playing. The voice was celebrating a wedding anniversary and expressing heartfelt gratitude to someone who seemed to be his wife. It then transitioned into words of affection that would make anyone blush if overheard. If someone had discovered the button and the recording, it would have been incredibly awkward.
What's going on? This clock is supposed to be a custom-made, one-of-a-kind gift from Emily, isn't it?
Keith blushed, confused, and tilted his head. I don't understand, but one thing's clear. This wasn't made for your dad. I couldn't figure out how to turn off the recording, and in my panic, I just thought I had to hide it. In hindsight, I realized that wasn't a solution at all. It's only natural that the missing clock would be noticed immediately. Looking back, I might have been too exhausted to think straight from dealing with everything every day.
So that's what happened. I'm sorry for jumping to conclusions and blaming you. But if Dad finds out you tried to throw it away, he'll be really hurt.
Keith gently patted my head. I'm sorry, you're right. I should have talked to you about it first. I was confused too, so it's understandable. As Keith and I were apologizing to each other, the door to our room opened. There stood my father-in-law, and both Keith and I turned pale.
Sorry for eavesdropping, but can you explain what I just heard from the beginning?
Just as Keith had mentioned earlier, my father-in-law had been searching the entire house for the clock. Realizing we couldn't keep it from him any longer, Keith and I explained everything to him. A few days later, Emily came to visit as usual. She had brought something with her again, holding a paper bag as she entered the living room. But as soon as she stepped in, she noticed something was off about the atmosphere. It was understandable, given that my in-laws and Keith were sitting there with serious expressions.
What's going on? Why are you all looking so scary? Oh, here, I made this for you all today. You can add it to tonight's dinner.
Just sit down.
Keith interrupted her, and Emily reluctantly sat down.
What's going on?
Emily, now visibly uneasy, watched as I took out the clock and placed it on the table, pressing the button. The voice of an unfamiliar man played, expressing gratitude to a woman named Kate. And then it transitioned into a series of blush-worthy sweet words. I'm so sorry, Kate and her husband. I apologized silently in my heart. There seemed to be no stop button, so once the recording started, it couldn't be turned off. When I glanced at Emily, her face was a mask of shock, her complexion ashen. Judging by her reaction, it seemed she didn't know about the voice recording feature. When I explained how I discovered the button, Emily's eyes narrowed in a way that seemed to say, "You shouldn't have meddled."
Emily, explain yourself properly.
My mother-in-law's voice, usually gentle but now firm and steady, made Emily flinch.
Surely it's just a mistake. It must be an error from the manufacturer or something.
Emily stammered, her eyes darting around nervously, but her words lacked any credibility. When my father-in-law barked, "Stop lying and tell the truth," Emily's eyes welled up with tears as she began to speak. First of all, this clock wasn't a custom-made item from Emily at all. She had taken it from the home of one of her mom friends with whom she was close without permission. That friend was Kate. Apparently, Kate had happily mentioned that it was a gift from her husband for their wedding anniversary, but Emily didn't like that. How selfish. Moreover, after taking it, Kate had asked her, "Have you seen my clock? It's missing," which put Emily in a difficult position. So she decided to gift it to my father-in-law, thinking it would be the perfect way to get rid of the evidence. As I listened to this, I was utterly astonished. How could she even come up with such an idea? Keith and my in-laws must have been even more shocked. My father-in-law had a look of resignation mixed with sadness, while my mother-in-law furrowed her brows, her shoulders trembling.
Could it be that the food you often bring as gifts?
Keith asked, and Emily raised her voice.
So what if it is? It's way more popular than anything I could make. So what choice did I have?
Driven by her emotions, Emily started spilling everything. It turns out, not only the clock, but even the gifts she had been bringing were things she had begged off of Kate. While I wondered why Kate would go along with such requests, knowing Emily, she might have been too forceful, leaving Kate unable to refuse. I felt a deep sympathy for Kate, whom I had never even met.
Taking something someone cherished without permission, and then using it as a retirement gift for your father. Do you realize what you've done?
My father-in-law's words were cold, and the tension in the room became palpable. Emily, who had been shouting moments before, fell silent, a nervous sweat forming on her forehead.
It's a crime.
My mother-in-law added coldly, driving the point home.
I'm so sorry, but my husband is always busy with his work and doesn't pay attention to me, and my daughter ignores me. I was so stressed. I felt like I was going to lose it. And then at home, Monica is the one everyone dotes on. I'm your daughter.
Emily's tearful excuses, sounding more like a tantrum from a child, were met with silence. No one was there to comfort her. My father-in-law stood up and made a phone call. Could he be calling the police? But after a while, the person who arrived was Emily's husband, Ken. Having left work early, Ken listened to the story from my father-in-law and apologized profusely to all of us. Ken explained that Emily had been involved in constant conflicts with others, and her affair was recently discovered, leading them to discuss their divorce. Well, no wonder their daughter ignores her. It all made sense now, and I nodded in understanding. It seemed that Emily had been trying to get on her in-laws' good side to secure a place for herself after the impending divorce. The fact that she even had someone else prepare gifts for her made the whole situation even more disgraceful.
I deeply apologize for the trouble we've caused. I was planning to inform you about our divorce soon, and then this happened. I take full responsibility for what happened, and I will return the clock to its rightful owner and personally apologize and make amends.
While Ken was apologizing, Emily was screaming frantically.
I'll apologize to Kate too. I'll make sure to give her a proper gift this time. So please, Dad, forgive me. Let me stay here.
Emily pleaded desperately, but Keith shouted at her from the side.
Emily, cut it out already. How could you come to this house after hurting your husband and daughter like that? Didn't you feel guilty when you gave Dad that clock? Do you even have a conscience?
My father-in-law nodded in agreement with Keith's words.
I've had enough of you. don't think you'll have a place here even after the divorce. You're no longer my daughter.
With those cold words, my father-in-law turned his back on Emily and left the room.
This is all your fault.
Emily screamed as she lunged at me.
Emily, stop it.
Keith held her back as I spoke firmly to her. Emily, if you have time to lash out at me, you should spend it reflecting and changing your ways. This is why everyone around you leaves. Emily looked around, stunned. Neither Keith, my mother-in-law, nor even her own husband would meet her gaze. She let out a muffled sob and collapsed in tears. When Ken came back to give us a final update, he told us that the clock had been safely returned to Kate. However, Kate and her husband were furious with Emily and had even involved a lawyer. It seems that all the frustration from enduring Emily's harassment had finally reached a breaking point, and I can understand why they'd want to take legal action after someone else heard that embarrassing recording from the clock. To avoid a theft charge, Ken agreed to pay for the damages and signed an agreement stating that Emily would no longer have any contact with Kate. They also decided to add this to the compensation for Emily's affair, which was the cause of the divorce. Through Ken, I was able to recover the items Emily had taken from me, and I felt relieved. Ken also mentioned that their daughter had requested that he be granted custody, which was finalized. Now, Emily is preparing for the divorce, burdened by the compensation she must pay and the bleak future ahead. 1 year after my father-in-law's retirement celebration, I'm still living with Keith at my in-laws' house. Recently, I found out I'm pregnant, and both Keith and my in-laws were overjoyed. My mother-in-law has been working even harder on her rehab so she can help take care of the baby, and my father-in-law has been studying parenting books with Keith. I hope my baby will be born safely. As I gently patted my stomach, I envisioned the joyful scenes of our growing family.